Hi, this is Brian Birdwell again. Welcome to session 3. In today's lesson, we're going to discuss sentence equivalence problems, which are very similar to the text completion problems that we focused on last week, with a couple of notable differences. Text completion problems have 1, 2, or 3 blanks, as we saw, and there is one correct answer for each blank. Probably the biggest difference between text completions and sentence equivalence problems is that sentence equivalence problems always have only one blank and 2 correct answers per blank. So you're going to select 2 answers for each of these problems. Due to the specific nature of the way these problems work, answer choice analysis can be very helpful in kind of narrowing in on what the viable options are. We're going to look specifically at answer choice analysis later in today's session. Those are the differences. The similarities are many, including the basic approach and the overall strategy for these problems. So they still involve a 3-step process: reading only the sentence, putting the hand on the screen or your scratch paper on the screen to cover up the answer choices, and be sure you're not attracted to answer choices before you've actually processed the information in the problem. Sentence equivalence problems still have targets, clues, and pivots, and sort of the bedrock of the whole strategy. You will still be writing your own fill-in word for sentence equivalence problems. Also, just like text completion problems, sentence equivalence will have the same traps: theme traps, spin traps, and reversal traps. And just like text completion problems with 2 or 3 blanks, you get no partial credit. You must get both correct answers in order to receive credit for the problem. So here's what they look like. I'll give you a moment just to kind of check it out. Notice there are 6 choices, and 2 of them are going to be correct. Read only the sentence, ignore the choices, and now let's look at targets, clues, and pivots. Going through this a little bit quickly because I know this much is familiar to you so far. So the target here, the blank should represent whatever there is no time to do. There's no time for something. This is what we need in the blank. The sort of clue that we have here is that decisions have to be made surely and swiftly. So if we need to make decisions surely and swiftly, what is there no time to do? Notice the semicolon pivot taking us in the same direction. You could come up with a number of ideas here. I imagine there's no time to dilly-dally. There's no time to waste. Anything kind of in that ballpark here. When we need to make decisions surely and swiftly, this is a very specific clue that can kind of point us to a better fill-in than, for example, no time to waste. It might be true that there's no time to waste, but what does that have to do with being sure and swift? In fact, what is the opposite of sure and swift that we want to make sure not do? It's sort of like inefficient and slow in this kind of vacillating or going back and forth kind of way. So if we can't come up with a great fill-in word, going back and forth, just the whole phrase will do just fine. As we saw last week, phrases work well as fill-ins as long as you are sure of the meaning and they relate to the specific elements of the sentence. So there's no time to go back and forth. Why? Because we need to be sure and swift. The same symbols and the same organizational process from here on out. Check for a good match, X for a bad match, tilde for something that sort of matches, and a question mark for unknown. So what can happen here is vacillate is definitely a match. In fact, I accidentally slipped and said that a moment ago, didn't I? So vacillating, going back and forth. Exculpate, not quite. Exculpate means to free from blame. Wane, like the moon, wanes and waxes. Wane can also be used to just indicate a general decrease. My energy was waning, after the 4-hour lecture, or my confidence was waning after I lost 3 games in a row, something like this, to diminish. Abate, very similar in meaning to wane. The storm abated. Equivocate. Now, equivocate means to go back and forth. This is a great vocabulary word to know, for one thing, because it's common on the GRE, and for another, it sort of has a misleading root. Many people see equa and they think it means equal, or they see voc and they think it means voice or vocal, so the same voice or something like this, when in fact that can be very misleading. Equivocate means to go back and forth. I'm not sure if I want to go to the movies, but I do want to go to the movies, but I don't want to go to the movies, but I do. This is sort of equivocating in a way. And a prize, not a good match. So write any of these words down that you don't know, put them on your jot list and prepare. The point of this sort of problem was to indicate the process that we're going to be using for these. Now, just like last week, we talked about how to get a better fill-in in text completion problems. We also want to work to getting the best fill-in possible on sentence equivalence questions. So take a moment and read this one. And I think there's a couple of great structural ideas here worth pointing out. First, let's identify our target, of course. What is the blank giving us more information about? It's something to describe his plans. Okay, so something about the plans. And we have this great we have this word mere, okay, which is a belittling thing, a bad thing. You know, his plans were mere, were something bad, something negative. And the other one is sort of the beginning of this clue, this pivot, for all. And this is a really important structure to be aware of. So for all, you know, his boasting, he still lost the race. This is the kind of construction we use that word in, and it means despite. So despite the magnanimous posturing, it was obvious to everyone that his plans were mere. So despite all the magnanimous posturings, his plans were something bad, something less than that. So when we come into take two, his plans were something bad, something less than magnanimous. And with this in mind, of course, we can go through the answer choices. We might come with a fill-in that says his plans were mere talk, or his plans were mere boasting. We could even say lies or something like this. It wouldn't be exactly correct. That would be a little bit too harsh of a spin for this. But as long as we get something in the blank that we can work with. His plans were mere sort of misleading. Were mere stories to get votes, something like this. As long as we realize that he's not very magnanimous, that these plans are, they're even put in quotes. His plans, in quotes, means that they're not going to happen. They're not actually plans. It's just talk. Mere talk might be a good one there. So epistemology is the study of knowledge. That's going to be out of there. Semantics, out of there as well, sort of just talking about the meaning. Idealism, notice how these first three words are kind of all in the same ballpark. It's not idealism to have a sort of magnanimous posturing. It was obvious to everyone that he's just talking here. Rhetoric is a good one here. That's going to be a good match. Mere talk, mere rhetoric. Pragmatism, he's not being practical. We know that he's not this magnanimous. There's no magnanimity here, despite what the candidate wants us to believe. Grandstanding is now also a really great match in this instance. Just seeking attention with sort of with words, with bravado. One thing that I want you to notice here is that there are two correct answers. And in the first example, vacillate and equivalate, interestingly, are pretty much synonyms. So vacillate and equivalate both mean to go back and forth. Whereas in the second example we just looked at, our correct answers, rhetoric and grandstanding, are definitely not synonyms, but they're very close in meaning. And the sentence is going to give us about the same idea. Despite what the candidate said, his plans were just rhetoric. His plans were just grandstanding. And so one important concept here is that the two correct answers don't have to be perfect synonyms, they do have to have quite a bit in common. They've got to be, if they're not synonyms, they've got to be as close to synonyms as we can possibly get. Now, this brings us to answer choice analysis, because if we know that there must be two answers that are correct, and those two answers must be synonyms or nearly synonyms, sometimes without having a good fill-in or having a poor analysis of the sentence, just by looking at the choices, we can decipher the correct answer. So take a moment and consider this one. Now we might notice that there are some pivots here. Time pivots are very common. After this happened, something else different happened. So he had a first blank attempt and it resulted in an unfavorable deal. So he had a bad first attempt, then he took a class and he was far more cunning the next time around. This is also a great opportunity for us to recycle if we want to. After the first uncunning or non-cunning attempt, he took a class and was more cunning the next time. So recognizing that dichotomy or that pivot and then simply rephrasing cunning to non-cunning or uncunning for the first blank can be a very helpful strategy. In terms of looking at the answer choices, we can notice right off the bat that covert and surreptitious are both synonyms, and they are synonyms for secretive. So while these two are synonyms, they are not the synonyms that we want, so we can eliminate both of them. The only other pair here is artless and ingenuous. And this is a very difficult problem, I think, because the obscure nature of artless and ingenuous, both of which kind of mean naive or unsophisticated, which is actually exactly what we want in this example. So notice that there are two pairs of words, and then hearty and deferential really have no connection to one another whatsoever. So what we're going to see is that in the vast majority of GRE sentence equivalence problems, most of them have two pairs of choices. So at least if you identify the two pairs, you have a 50-50 shot of guessing the right answer simply by pairing up the answer choices. Even without looking at this problem at all, you could narrow down the answers to either being covert and surreptitious or artless and ingenuous, if, of course, you know the meaning of those words. So when we talk about answer choice analysis, it can be a very powerful tool. We want to make sure we really know how to use it first. So grouping them into pairs. Most sets of choices are going to have two pairs and two unrelated answer choices, though there are other possibilities. One other possibility is that there are three pairs, or that there's only one pair and four completely unrelated answer choices. Now, of course, if we have the latter there, a one pair set of answers is probably going to be a very easy problem rather than a more difficult problem. So we wouldn't expect to have as much difficulty with that one in the first place. Another trick that the GRE likes to employ for these answer choices is what we call the false triple. So there will be three words that look like synonyms. And so if you identify this and you say, oh, hey, these three words basically all mean the same thing, you might not choose them because you think, oh, I'm looking for a pair, and here are three. That's too many. So very important that when you feel you've identified three synonyms in the choices, that you take a closer look and make sure that they don't differ in some very important way. Take a look at this false triple and see if you can identify how one of them is different from the others. And note the comment in parentheses there that if you can identify a false triple, it's highly likely that two of them are in fact the correct answer. And if you can find the odd man out, then you will be well on your way to a correct response here. Of course, in this instance, terse and brusque both have a negative connotation, whereas someone being succinct has a positive spin. So terse and brusque are the pair with the negative spin. That's going to be our correct answer here. Again, if you know all 6 words, answer choice analysis can at least get you a 50-50 chance most of the time, which is pretty cool. Much better than you would normally have. So what we've been doing up to now is sentence analysis. And if you want to, I do want to make it available as an option to do answer choice analysis first. Because it can be that powerful of a tool. It doesn't have to be a backup strategy. It can actually be your primary strategy. But I kind of like to look at it like dribbling right-handed or dribbling left-handed in the game of basketball, and it's good to be able to do both. So practice both. Over the next few weeks in your practice at home, just try both and see if one or the other works better for you consistently, or perhaps you start to identify situations that you can recognize where answer choice analysis is most beneficial versus sentence analysis being most beneficial. Just pay attention to that in your studies and make sure that you're trying to look at the problems both ways. So just let's do a little exercise here. I'll put a minute on the clock and let's see how many pairs we can identify in these 3 sets of answer choices. All right, let's have a look. On the first pair, or the first set of choices here, we have epitome and acme. Remember Acme from the old cartoons? Was always the name of the company. Acme means the top of the business. The epitome means the very top, the best. And we also have hiatus and lull, sort of a pause in the action, so to speak. Nadir is an interesting word because nadir is sort of the opposite of the high point. A nadir is a low point. The moon has, or the sun, for example, they have a zenith in the sky, which is the high point, and they also have a nadir, which is the low point. And here, nadir and resolution have no relationship to each other whatsoever. So without even looking at this problem, the correct answer must be epitome and acme, or hiatus and lull. And those words are very different, so we should be able to decipher which one works best in the sentence. In the second example, we have 3 pairs. So give yourself points if you identified any one of the pairs. Give yourself full points for the exercise if you identified all 3. Garrulous and loquacious both mean talkative. Again, as I mentioned last session, the GRE is very fond of words that describe being talkative or not talkative, such as taciturn and reticent. So that pair, taciturn and reticent, is the exact opposite of this other pair. So we'd want to be sure what the spin or meaning of the blank needed to be before choosing one of these. On the other hand, we have related words. I think that sometimes this is another family of words. Whether we are friendly or unfriendly is another family of words that the GRE loves. And they're kind of easy to get confused, especially like in my own mind. Talkativeness and being friendly for some reason kind of go together, outgoing or something, even though this is not true at all, of course. One can be very friendly and be very reticent. But here we have 2 words that both mean friendly or outgoing, gregarious and convivial. Notice the sort of the root here with convivial, viv, anything with VIV, like vivir in Spanish, is about life, vitality, and con I think of as being the root with. So with vitality. with life is kind of the root of this in a way to help you remember convivial. And in the final example, we have a false triple, so give yourself extra points if you identify this false triple. Enervate, flag, and wilt. So it's highly likely here, since vivify, indict, and stymie, neither one of these has a relationship to the other. So it's basically 100% likely that two of these three, enervate, flag, and wilt, are the correct answer for this problem. We just need to decide which one is different from the others and how so. So this is where sort of specific, very precise word knowledge can be very helpful. In this instance, enervate is something that is passive or transitive. It happens to you. Enervate is something that someone does to you. Someone enervates you of your energy. They come over to your house and they talk about all their problems for way too long. They enervate you. An enervating sort of acquaintance or friend. Whereas flag and wilt are different in that they are more active, or what we might say is intransitive. They can happen all on their own. So I can just flag. I don't have to be flagged like I can be enervated. I just can flag on my own. My energy flags. Or I can wilt without any outside source. That is a pretty subtle difference, but one that is clear if you know the precise meanings of the words. So therefore, we know without even reading the sentence that flag and wilt must be the answer. This is why answer choice analysis can be so powerful as a tool, because then we don't even get tangled up in the process of creating a fill-in and doing all of that. Of course, we have to know the words and know the words very well in order for this to be effective. So as always, the bottom line with the GRE is still vocabulary, regardless of what strategies you may be employing. Another reminder, just like we had last class, not to waste time when you don't know the words. So, for example, we could look at the one on the screen here. Her tendency to blank everything and everyone during her stand-up comedy act was at odds, there's our pivot, with her usual broad-minded persona. So she's usually broad-minded, and this tendency is at odds with that. So creating a fill-in here, something that's at odds with being broad-minded. The word that immediately comes to my mind is sort of narrow-minded. So if we're going to write narrow-minded in there, or be narrow-minded, her tendency to be narrow-minded with everything and everyone, would get us somewhere on the problem. However, if I could quickly look at the answer choices now, I could say, okay, her tendency to be, narrow-minded with everything and everyone was at odds with her broad-minded persona. That makes sense. It's not grammatically a great sentence, but it makes sense. And when I get to the choices, all of a sudden I see that they're all verbs. So then perhaps rather than her tendency to have a narrow mind or to be narrow-minded with everything, I might want to get more precise with that. I might want to make it more verbish, for example, just a more concise, succinct verb. And knowing that she's a stand-up comic, what do stand-up comics do to everything and everyone that make them seem narrow-minded? Oh, well, they criticize it. They make fun of it. That would be a more accurate or a more precise fill-in. And then, of course, going through our process of elimination here, making sure that we make a mark for every individual choice. I go to arrogate and say, for example, I don't know arrogate. It's kind of an uncommon word. Wow, I'm not really sure. Deprecate, I think I've heard it. I think I've heard it before, but I can't really define it, so I have to be disciplined and write a question mark down. Depreciate. Now, that looks exactly the same as deprecate. Of course, there's just one letter difference. They're maybe the same word. I don't know. I'm not sure. Depreciate. I know that homes depreciate in value, but I'm not really sure of a definition, so I'll put a question mark there. Exacerbate. Now, exacerbate, most of you probably know, we're role playing a student here that says, wow, exacerbate, or maybe they don't even recognize it. Interesting things happen under time pressure in an exam. Common words that you may have heard, like exacerbate, suddenly you see written and they look so funny and strange that you don't recognize them. So let's pretend that this person is succumbing to pressure and they don't actually know the meaning of the word exacerbate either. Galvanize. Galvanize. I know that you can galvanize people. You can galvanize a movement, for example. You can galvanize the support for a revolution or something. So it sounds like at least something that I could do, at this point, and maybe it means make fun of or criticize. So this person might slap a tilde there. Lampoon, like lampoons. Naked Gun, those old satirical movies from the 90s. National Lampoons is a company that lampoon means to make fun of, to be satirical about, to satirize, or to criticize. So here, this person would have 1 check mark, a tilde, and 4 question marks. And the takeaway is the same as it was last week when I gave you a similar example. You have 60 seconds. That's it. So make your decision and move on. Choose lampoon and one other one and just keep cruising. Keep going. Don't waste your time here. Of course, the actual correct answer in this instance would be deprecate. So some traps to watch out for in sentence equivalence. Very similar to the traps that we saw last week in text completions. Let me give you a minute to check this one out. So in this example, I think there are 2 great choices here if you don't read the whole sentence. So the frequent and wide-ranging travels of a photojournalist are often awesome. Okay? And then, of course, the first 2 choices right out of the gates are exciting and dangerous. This would be succumbing to a big problem that we discussed last week of not reading the entire sentence first. So once you recognize that actually we're looking for something that describes these travels as far as racking up bills for freelancers working without a guarantee of payment. So racking up huge bills. Now, lavish sounds like that. Lavish is in the ballpark. You think of someone like going out and spending a lot of money on very, huge bills. Sounds like a lavish vacation, lavish expenditures. However, this is a spend trap because we don't want, it's not that our photojournalists are out there living a lavish lifestyle. In fact, they're just working up huge bills by working without a guarantee of payment for the moment. Repertorial, theme trap. Sounds like a reporter. Reporter, photojournalist. Great to recognize that. And if you have to guess away from it. And just by kind of eliminating these 2 answer choices, the first 2 is not the specific meaning of the sentence. There's a spend trap, there's a theme trap, costly and expensive, the 2 synonyms remaining. They must be the pair. And of course, we could have eliminated them through answer choice analysis in the very beginning. That exciting and dangerous are sort of synonyms. Not really, but sort of. And costly and expensive are also synonyms. So we should have at least eliminated lavish and repertorial to begin with. So watch out for reversal traps as well. They do happen in sentence equivalence where we get something that we are actually aiming for the opposite of if we miss an important pivot. So just to recap the strategies, again, this is all sound very familiar from your practice with text completions from last week. The basic approach is exactly the same, only the sentence, target clues, pivots, write your own fill-in. And on writing fill-ins, anything that gets the idea across is totally game. It can be a phrase. It doesn't have to be an all-star vocabulary word. Answer choice analysis, a very useful tool here. There are usually two pairs, and one of those pairs will be the answer. Nuance is really important as far as where you can find false triples, and knowing just a slight distinction or a subtlety in a definition of an answer choice can make a big difference. When you're eliminating, again, just as it is with text completions, don't be afraid to guess a word that you don't know. It's a very healthy strategy, healthy idea. And watch out for the same traps that you've already been watching out for in text completion exercises: spin, theme, and reversal. Okay, with that in mind, let's put these strategies to work on some problems. I will give you 1 minute for the first one. All right, looking at this first one, we have that the suspect was hoping that the expert witness would corroborate the story or help it out, validate his story. But we have this very important pivot here. However, rather than corroborating the story or validating his story for him, she instead proceeded to totally deny his account of what happened, contradict his account of what happened, disprove his account of what happened, something along these lines. So one correct answer that we can already identify is definitely contradict. And the other choices are interesting because of the sort of specificity, I think, of the meaning here. Rebuff is probably a good guess for a lot of you. Rebuff is something that you do to a person or to a person's advance. You rebuff, unrequited love. Someone makes an advance and you rebuff them, but you cannot rebuff an account, a story of what happened. And the same with abjure. You can abjure a belief, but you cannot abjure an account. So because of the specificity of these, even though they're kind of in the ballpark, they are incorrect. Disabuse, you cannot disabuse an account either. You can disabuse a person of one of their beliefs. Like you can disabuse a child of their belief in Santa. In other words, you can take away their belief in Santa, but you can't disabuse an account of something. And then perhaps, precipitate in at least a couple of its senses, not just the sense of rain falling from the sky, but precipitate leading up to something else. And we would be left with gainsay, which may be a word that you didn't know, or maybe you've seen it on a vocab list, or you've encountered it before. I'll give you a minute to look at the next one. Okay, so very important that we recognize the structure of this sentence. For all his X, he was only able to get two of his friends to join him. Very important that we recognize the construction of for all. So if I say something like, for all his studying, he, what would you say? Probably something along with failed. For all his studying, he failed the exam. This is because for all essentially means despite. It's a pivot that indicates the opposite. So despite trying to get everyone to join him in this dangerous stunt, he was only able to get two of his friends. So for all his campaigning, for all his convincing, for all his imploring, or simply for all his trying, he was only able to get, only being a very important word here, that changes the meaning entirely. If it said he was able to get two of his friends, it'd be very different. So he was only able to get two of his friends to join him in the dangerous stunt. Now, what is something along the lines of imploring or trying to get people to join you? Our two correct answers here are inveigling and cajoling. Great words to know. Cajoling your friends into going to the movies with you. Oh, come on. You don't have anything better to do. Come on, dude. Come out to the movies with me. Whatever this may be. Carping and grousing, interesting words because they sort of take animals like the fish, the carp, or the bird, the grouse, and turn them into verbs. Extenuating and colluding, just generally good words to know. Any that you don't know, go ahead and throw on your jot list. Let's go ahead and take a minute for this next one. One thing that makes this problem interesting is judgments made blank by judges without a jury system. It's not immediately obvious what part of speech the blank should be. And we encounter this often. I think the most difficult instances can be sometimes with verbs. It can be difficult to understand that that's what the sentence wants. So if you have to, if you're struggling with a fill-in because you don't quite understand what role it's supposed to play, take one quick look at the choices. This is just a backup strategy, if you have to do it. And here you can see ly at the end of all the choices very quickly. Okay, it's an adverb. So it's going to describe the way in which those judgments were made. Okay, so there's a bunch of colonies here. The courts existed for arbitrating disputes and for handing down judgments made blank in some fashion by judges without a jury system. And it turns out that this without a jury system is our best clue here as to the meaning of the blank. So, in my own fill-in, I just kind of say without a jury. So judgments made without a jury by judges without a jury. It's recycling, and it works. Or you could just say, in other words, made just by the judges, only by the judges. They had no jury helping them to make these decisions. And when we get to the blanks, oh, wow, contumaciously, pratingly, polemically, probably words that most of us are unfamiliar with. So go ahead and pause the recording if you want to add these to your jot list. We'll go ahead and say that arbitrarily is sort of the opposite of what we want. It seems to be a recycle because we know that the purpose of these courts is to arbitrate, but they weren't made arbitrarily, these judgments. They were made alone by a judge. And one word that describes that is summarily, summary judgment. the legal definition of the word summary or summarily, as when a judge makes a decision. The other word here that most nearly matches what we want is unilaterally. If there's no jury involved, it's just the judge all by his or her lonesome making the decision. Probably a him at the end of the French and Indian War. I doubt there were women judges. Okay, the other words, go ahead and write down and look up if you want to add them to your list later. If you didn't know them, just be sure that on your scratch paper you're being deliberate with the way you're making marks, and that you had question marks by the ones you didn't know. You made a guess, and that's the best you can do in a lot of situations. So that's why this whole thing about the GRE is add as many words to your vocabulary as you possibly can. Learn strategies for working the problems when you know the words and for working the problems when you don't know the words. And know that the whole game is that over time, to bring probability into your favor. So by consistently approaching the questions with the same process and by guessing consistently in light of that process, your guesses are no longer just wild guesses. Your guesses begin to get closer and closer and closer to the correct answers. You begin to bend probability in your favor as you apply the process throughout the test. Trust me, it works. Okay, how about the next problem here? I'll give you 1 minute for it. This is a funny problem to me. He was dismayed to see that his daughter's personality was a magnification of his own. Oh no, he had a bad personality and his daughter got it too. His foibles, now that's a great word to know, his foibles, writ large in his progeny. Great here if you know that progeny means daughter, semicolon, or excuse me, offspring, his daughter in this instance. Semicolon means no pivot, basically going in the same direction. So his foibles, his flaws, were there in his daughter. Where he was staunch, and this is a magnification, keep in mind. So where he was staunch, she was, great fill in here. I wonder what you guys used. I used really staunch. Where is it? There it is. She was really staunch. And where he was harsh, she was vicious. So if you didn't pick up on this whole magnification concept for the first, by the time you got to the first blank, or the blank, you would hear. So harsh leads to vicious. So she's a more extreme version of him. You know, if you can't think of a word that means really staunch, just put really staunch in the blank. It aligns with the meaning and it's recycled so you know it's accurate. Now it just depends on the choices. And of course, looking at these choices, some of them are quite obscure and difficult. The correct answers here are illiberal and doctrinaire. So illiberal means not liberal at all, very conservative, very staunch, very rigid. Doctrinaire, basically the same thing, you know, following a doctrine, adhering to a doctrine very closely. Blithe is a really great word for vocabulary. I think to be blithe, to be sort of blissfully unaware of things that are happening, driving, you know, in a blithe mood, driving down the road, you know, not really heeding yield signs or whatever it may be, because you're sort of joyous and carefree in the moment. Blithe is I like that word a lot. So quixotic is an interesting word because it comes from Don Quixote, meaning overly idealistic and impractical. An example of a word that's not very old in the English language, maybe a couple hundred years old since the writing of Don Quixote. Okay, let's keep moving. A hard problem here. Warning, 1 minute. Tough problem here, especially when we get to the choices. Now, in the problem itself, in the sentence, the writer was unusually brash for a woman in England and often faced social strictures in response to behavior, her brash behavior, which was judged insufficiently blank for a proper lady. So, insufficient. She is lacking something for a proper lady. So I think the easiest fill in here is just to recycle proper. So it was insufficiently proper for a proper lady. She was insufficiently proper. She was brash and or insufficiently proper. Now, it's a great fill-in. It's recycled. We know it works. The trouble begins when we get to the choices, I think. And the most difficult part about this one, I believe, is that the two correct answers, meet and becoming, don't even look like the right part of speech. They don't even look like adjectives. Meet, I think few of you have probably ever seen used as an adjective before, only the verb form. And becoming is an ing verb used here as an adjective. Priggish is kind of a false triple here in a way. Priggish is in the ballpark of what we want, but someone would never complain that a person was insufficiently priggish, because priggish does sort of mean proper, but it's a bad thing. It means proper in a very bad way. You're way too proper, and they weren't saying that she was insufficiently priggish. In fact, she was so far from priggish that she was just insufficiently plain old proper. Meet and becoming both being synonyms for proper in that sense. Tough problem for that reason. There's two very tricky answer choices there. Okay, last one. Okay, hopefully ending on a good note today. The life of the housewife to the life of her ancestor. So, housewife versus rugged pioneer woman. We've got some kind of rhythms of everyday life in counterpoint. That's our great pivot here and clue. Counterpoint, I guess, might more accurately be described as the pivot. And excitement and danger would be described as the clue here. So what's the opposite of excitement and danger? Well, how about boring or just everyday? I like recycling every day here, thus placing the everyday rhythms of everyday life or the boring rhythms of everyday life in counterpoint to the excitement and danger of the frontier. And the two words we have here that most nearly mean boring or everyday, quotidian and mundane. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you guys again for session 4.